Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 8th chapter of Inheritance, written by A's for Amy 71 on AO3. I have a feeling that this chapter is going to hit me right in the feels. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe It's Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game, and it indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. Some things go right, some things go wrong, and Izuku's world changes again. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 8. When Izuku was finally able to come out of his room, Granny Ito was looking very tired, but was sitting comfortably on the couch, and not in handcuffs. Izuku had been afraid that she would be under arrest or something. He went and took a seat beside her, wanting to comfort her somehow.
Are they gonna be able to help?
Izuku asked her quietly while the detective talked to Sir Nighteye and All Might. They are trying to figure out what to do right now, she told him, patting his arm. But the most important thing is keeping you safe. It doesn't matter what happens to me as long as you're okay.
It matters to me,
Izuku said, crossing his arms across his chest. A tear rolled down Granny's cheek. I'm so sorry, Izuku, she said in a shaky voice. I never wanted to do any of the things he told me to.
He didn't give you a choice,
Izuku told her loyally. I don't deserve such kindness, she insisted. But I want you to know that I wasn't pretending to like you, ever. You are a wonderful boy, and you're growing up to be a wonderful young man. I wish...
I'm not really going to see you again, am I?
Izuku asked quietly when she didn't finish. No, she said, wiping a tear away. It would be far too dangerous. He nodded and leaned towards her, to rest his head on her shoulder.
I'm going to miss you,
he said sadly. I'm going to miss you too. In the end, they decided that Granny Ito and her family should be moved for their own protection, at least until All Might could deal with the man Granny knew as Shigaraki, but who All Might knew as a villain called All for One. It was a stroke of luck, really, that Granny knew where his base was and could draw a map up for them. They had at least a week to work with to come up with a plan for a confrontation between the number one hero and the number one villain. In the meantime, Izuku and his father would need to also move, and Granny Ito was not allowed to know where, for everyone's safety. Before the heroes and the police left, All Might asked to be excused to take care of business and disappeared down the hallway. Izuku assumed that the man needed the toilet, but when he went to his room later, he found that every poster on his wall had been autographed, and so had the bottom of his snow globe. He might not have gotten to ask All Might all of the questions he had wanted to, but this absolutely made up for it. The rest had all happened very quickly. Izuku was moved to another school just before summer break, so he barely had time to get to know anyone, but the other kids seemed okay. While he was at his first day of the new school, a group of movers had descended on the Midoriya household and packed up everything. They were moved to an apartment in a much taller building, with much better security, and an elevator inside instead of stairs outside to their floor. The rooms had a slightly different layout from their old apartment, but otherwise were pretty much the same. The building itself was more modern, and their location was more in the city than the suburbs. It was closer to his dad's office, so that was nice too. It was just a lot to take in. 3 days after Izuku moved to his new home with his dad, a raid was planned on All for One's home base, and it was hoped that Izuku and his father would no longer have to worry about a strange man giving Izuku quirks or taking its blood. It went without saying that Izuku was not allowed to talk to anyone about any of it, and when asked why he moved to a new school after the beginning of the school year, they kept it simple and said that his dad had been transferred for work and it couldn't wait. When the other kids asked Izuku what his quirk was, he showed them how he could turn see-through, and left it at that. The raid on All for One didn't go as planned. There was nothing about it on the news, but Detective Tsukauchi came to see Izuku's dad to fill them in on things, and he looked shaken. "We don't think you need to worry about Shigaraki," he told them, holding his cup of untouched tea. "But the boy named Tomura and his warping villain escaped, and Shigaraki's body was taken as well. It was an intense battle, and the amount of blood Shigaraki lost really wasn't consistent with sustainability. We've got the story suppressed. It won't be reported on any news outlets." Izuku knew he was using big words to try and keep him from understanding what he was saying, but he knew that it meant that the bad guy was probably dead. "How are All Might and Sir Nighteye?" Izuku's dad asked. Izuku thought that was a weird question, since All Might was indestructible. "There were some injuries," the detective said, his eyes flicking to Izuku for a moment, looking worried. "Nothing the doctors can't handle, though." Izuku nodded with satisfaction. All Might always came out on top. He wondered if Granny Ito knew that the man who had been threatening her and her family was dead. He hoped so.
"I'm gonna write All Might a letter to say thank you,"
Izuku said as Detective Tsukauchi was leaving. "I bet he'd like that."
"Where should I send it?"
Izuku asked.
"I'd normally send it to his agency like the others, but this is supposed to be a secret, right?"
Izuku practically knew the address of his agency by heart. He had a small stack of thank you form letters from there, for all the letters he'd sent in the past. "Right," the detective said with a nod. "I have a feeling you'll be seeing Sir Nighteye before long, and you can pass it to him. He'll get it where it needs to go." Izuku nodded and couldn't help but feel excited to meet the sidekick again. Maybe he could ask some of his questions then. In the meantime, he would write his letter so it would be ready. That night, Izuku had troubling dreams. Shigaraki was in them, and so was Dr. Tsubasa. And Izuku was strapped to a table in a dark room, and there was eerie light coming from tanks of what looked like green slime. It was scary, but Izuku found he couldn't move his limbs or cry out for help. When he woke up in a panic, he was covered in sweat and shaking, but was overcome by sleepiness again. He vaguely remembered his dream for the few minutes after waking, but they faded away by the time he'd used the bathroom and gotten dressed. All that was left was a vague sense of unease. It didn't take long for Sir Nighteye to show up at the Midoriya's new apartment. He came the very next day. He looked a little dishevelled and wild-eyed, but unhurt in any way. He was still dressed like a salaryman, but there were dark smudges under his eyes, and he was a little pale.
"Sir Nighteye!"
Izuku said happily when he opened the door. He already knew it was him from the door camera. The new apartment building made people who lived there buzz in any guests from the lobby. "Midoriya-kun," he said formally. "I wonder if I could have a moment of your time. Is your father at home?"
"Come in,"
Izuku invited, setting out a pair of guest slippers for him.
"My dad's at work right now."
"He leaves you alone?" Sir asked, looking a little troubled.
"Not usually, just since Granny Ito had to."
Izuku trailed off, knowing he knew why Granny Ito was no longer looking after him.
"He says I'm old enough to stay home by myself for a while, as long as I don't go out or cook anything on the stove."
Sir Nighteye nodded slowly, as if considering the situation, as he took a seat in the living room and refused the offer of tea. Izuku knew they couldn't hire a new housekeeper, just in case. Normally, he'd spend all day in school, then go to gymnastics, and wouldn't be home alone as much. It was summer break, though, so he was on his own. "That makes sense, I suppose. The reason I'm here is to ask if you would allow me to use my quirk on you again. To confirm something I already saw," he explained.
"It's fine with me,"
Izuku said.
"Is everything okay?"
The fight with All for One was very difficult, and hard on All Might, Sir told him seriously. He was injured, and I used my quirk on him to make sure he would be alright. However, I want to look into your future, because I already know that you will see him again at some point in the future, and I want to see him as well as you will. To make sure he's going to recover well."
"You said your quirk is never wrong,"
Izuku reminded him shrewdly.
"You shouldn't need to check with me."
"You're a smart kid," Sir said with the ghost of a smile bending the corners of his lips upwards. "You're right. Seeing All Might getting injured like this has made me nervous. I'm second-guessing myself, and want to use your future encounter with him to make myself feel better."
"If it makes you feel better, then sure,"
Izuku said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table and holding out his arm like before. Sir Nighteye looked grateful as he reached out and grasped Izuku's wrist lightly and looked into his eyes. It seemed to go on for a long time, with Sir Nighteye in sort of a trance, and Izuku sitting somewhat awkwardly, waiting for him to find whatever it was he was looking for. When Sir finally blinked and released him, Izuku tried not to be rude or rub the arm that was starting to go numb from hanging in the air for so long. "Yes," the sidekick murmured to himself. "Alright, okay, we can deal with that."
"Is everything still okay?"
Izuku asked, tilting his head to the side. "Oh, yes, thank you. I saw what I needed to see."
"That's good then,"
Izuku said, feeling glad. After a moment, Sir Nighteye stood up. "I need to go meet with All Might," he told Izuku.
"Oh, okay. Could you just wait a minute? I wrote him a letter if you could give it to him."
He waited a moment until Sir nodded in agreement, and then sprinted to his room to get the letter sitting on his desk. He folded it up and then trotted back out to find Sir looking at Hero Analysis for the Future number 10, which had been sitting on the coffee table, where Izuku had been writing in it before the door buzzer had sounded earlier. Seeing his notebook in the hands of someone else made his heart jump. He didn't share his notes with people very often. "You've made some very astute observations," Sir Nighteye said without apologizing for snooping. "And your drawing skills are very good for someone your age."
"Thanks,"
Izuku said, feeling proud.
"I have a lot of questions. If I write you a letter, do you think you could answer some of them?"
"I think that could be arranged," he said, closing the notebook and handing it back to Izuku in exchange for the letter to All Might. Sir produced a business card and handed it to Izuku, who looked at it in awe, It was plain white, with navy blue lettering, but it had the address of Sir's office at Might Tower, and his phone number on it. You can send a letter to this address, and you may call that number if you have an emergency. Only if you have an emergency. Understood?
Yes, sir,
Izuku said reverently.
I promise.
Very well, Sir said with a little smile. I look forward to hearing from you. Now, one last thing. A joke, if you would. Izuku laughed. Sir must really enjoy jokes. He thought for a moment before he came up with one he thought was suitable.
What do you call a fly with no wings?
What do you call a fly with no wings? Sir asked.
A walk,
Izuku told him with a big grin. Sir Nighteye gave a huff of laughter before he nodded in appreciation. Goodbye, Midoriya-kun. The moment the door closed behind Sir Nighteye, Izuku was racing to get some paper to start the letter he wanted to write. When his dad got home, Izuku was still awake. He'd made a passable meal using just the microwave and rice cooker, and sat and talked to his dad while they ate dinner. Hey, Izuku, his father said as they washed the dishes together. Would you be interested in attending a summer camp this year? It's a little late to sign up, but there are a couple that you can go away to for a week or two. You liked the nature camp that one time.
That was fun, but if I go, who will take care of you?
Izuku asked seriously. His father sighed and ruffled his hair. Who's the parent here? If you're away at camp and I'm at work, there won't be much to take care of around here. Don't let housekeeping get in the way of something you want to do. Besides, I feel bad leaving you home by yourself all the time. You should be out having fun, and there really should be a reliable adult to look after you for a couple of more years yet. Izuku considered this.
Maybe if there was a gymnastics or quirk training camp.
I'll have my assistant look into it. In the end, Izuku did not get enrolled into a summer camp for a week or two. His father proposed a completely different idea altogether after getting a phone call from Sir Nighteye. All Might's sidekick had called Izuku's dad to ask if Izuku might be allowed to do a sort of junior internship at All Might's agency for a few weeks. Until school started again, he could take a train each morning and spend the day learning the ins and outs of a hero agency, and then take the train back home in the afternoon. Izuku had nearly fainted when his father had said he'd turned down the offer because Izuku would be bored hanging out in an office all day. He laughed uproariously when Izuku had actually shouted at him in disbelief and admitted that he'd accepted the offer. What safer place for his son to be than in the agency of the world's greatest hero or his sidekick?
Dad, I'm gonna need some new notebooks,
Izuku insisted excitedly. 2 days later, Izuku was met in the lobby of Might Tower by a nice lady in a black pencil skirt and a frilly blouse. She pinned a special visitor badge to Izuku's shirt and took him on a truncated tour of the building.
This place is huge,
Izuku said, in awe of how many buttons there were in the panel on the elevator. All Might does so much work that it takes scores of people to handle the paperwork, scheduling, merchandising, image branding, and things like that. That way, All Might can concentrate on what he does best, she explained kindly.
Saving people and catching villains,
Izuku said enthusiastically. Exactly right, she agreed with a smile. She led him down long hallways full of busy people, explaining what each department they passed did for the agency. They skipped floors here and there, for no reason Izuku could discern, but he didn't worry too much about it. Exploring this place seemed like it could take years to see it all. He was very interested in one of the areas they had passed, which had a large collection of All Might merchandise on display, including some prototypes and items that had never gone into production. He wanted to linger there and soak it all in, but he also didn't want to slack off on his first day. He reluctantly followed the woman leading him, hoping he'd get a chance to come back and examine everything some other time. They passed through a cafeteria that was relatively quiet, since it was between breakfast and lunchtime, and took another elevator that was not connected to the other one they had taken before. This elevator takes us up to the floors that All Might uses. There's a special entrance on the floor that only he can use, and the very top floors are only accessible to him, Sir Nighteye, and a couple of other very close friends of his. When the doors slid open, there was a noticeable lack of people compared to the lower floors. There was an attractive woman sitting at a reception desk that looked up from her computer when the elevator arrived, and she smiled at them. She thanked the woman that had escorted Izuku this far, and then dismissed her. She waved at Izuku, then got back into the elevator and was gone. "Hello there, Midoriya-kun," she said in a honeyed voice that was so nice it was probably her quirk. "We've been expecting you. Sir Nighteye will be down in just a minute. In the meantime, I'll help you get your iris scanned for security clearance." Izuku was amazed by the little panel on the wall that he had to stand in front of, on a small step stool, to have his eyes scanned into the computer so that he could get into the upper floors of Might Tower. By the time the panel beeped and gave the green light, another door opened across the room, and Sir Nighteye stepped out and beckoned Izuku to come with him. "I trust you had no trouble getting here this morning?" Sir asked him as he led Izuku into a stairwell with a wall of windows that allowed him to see across the city.
"It was easy,"
Izuku told him, climbing the steps eagerly beside him.
"This building is the tallest one around, and it has a big globe on top."
"That's true," Sir told him. "I'm going to take you to my office now, but I'd like to take you to see All Might. He's still in the hospital, but it's okay for him to have visitors."
"Was he really hurt that bad?"
Izuku asked worriedly. He couldn't imagine it. As long as he'd hero-worshipped All Might, he'd never seen him with more than a scratch on the news. "Yes, I'm afraid so," Sir said seriously, using an iris scanner to open the door at the top of the stairs. He led Izuku into an area that was way bigger than any office he had ever seen or heard of. It took up at least half of the entire floor of the building. There were floor-to-ceiling windows with an incredible view, and a large seating area with an absolutely huge armchair that must have been made specifically for All Might's height and bulk. There were other chairs and a sofa grouped around that. There was a large desk with a couple of chairs in front of it, some office equipment, and an enormous bank of television screens that seemed to show different parts of the city in real time.
"Wow!"
Izuku said, eyes roaming over the different screens.
"I'll bet you don't even have to patrol with so many cameras around."
"Well, that would be the ideal, of course, but why do you think patrolling is still necessary?" Sir asked him, coming to stand beside him and look at the monitors.
Cameras can't be everywhere?"
Izuku guessed. Correct. Villains and criminals seldom plan or commit crimes in the open. Most crimes start indoors and end up in public as the result of getting caught.
"That makes sense,"
Izuku said, wondering if it would be bad to get out his new notebook and start taking notes.
"Bad guys need to have hideouts."
Sir nodded and turned away from the monitors to go to his desk.
What does a junior intern do anyway?
Izuku asked.
My dad said that interns are usually from high schools or universities, and they go to places like where they want to work in the future to learn stuff.
That's a good explanation. Occasionally we will take on an especially promising student from one of the hero high schools, like UA, Shiketsu, or others, and give them a taste of what it's like to use what they've learned at school in the real world. There is only so much school can teach you, and the rest must be gained by experience, trial, and error.
But I haven't learned anything about hero work in school. I'm not even in middle school yet.
Sir gave him a small smile as he tapped at the keys of his computer. That's why you're a junior intern. Your father said you've had some quirk counseling and training, but we both agree that you could use more. You and I, and perhaps some trusted allies, will spend some time this summer to examine each of your quirks and decide which are best suited to hero work, if that is still what you wish to pursue.
I want to be a hero more than anything,
Izuku said firmly.
I want to protect people like Granny Ito, who get bullied by villains, and people like my mom, who died because of villains. I don't want that to happen to anyone else.
Izuku didn't get as emotional anymore, talking about his mother and her death, but he never forgot how it felt to lose her. Now he was simply passionate about protecting anyone else from dying needlessly. A worthy goal, Sir told him. Also, you've been given an immense power with immense potential. All for One had similar potential, and made some very unfortunate choices that led him to where he is today. It's our responsibility to make sure that you understand the best uses for your quirks and how to make the best choices regarding them. Do you have a notebook like the one I saw that lists your observations about your own quirks? Izuku looked at Sir slightly suspiciously, wondering how the man knew about that. He nodded. Excellent. You'll bring it with you tomorrow, and we can see what you've already discovered, Sir told him, sounding satisfied. Today, we're going to visit the hospital, and let that determine what else we'll be doing. He stood from behind his computer and motioned for Izuku to follow him across the room to another retinal scanner. A moment later, they were in a small, private elevator that took them all the way down to the parking garage under the building. Sir's car was a normal-looking sedan with dark-tinted windows and comfortable leather seats, a lot like the car his dad drove when he didn't take a train to work. I want to prepare you for what you're going to see when you get to All Might's room, Sir told him. He's healing as well as they can manage, but he's lost a considerable portion of his left side. He's not as strong as he once was, and tires quickly. This should improve over time.
I'm not supposed to go to hospitals because of my quirk,
Izuku said, timidly. He really wanted to see All Might, even though he was afraid of what he might see. He didn't want to miss out on this chance to spend time with his idol just because of the off chance that someone might die in another part of the hospital. This is a special hospital, Sir assured him. No one there is in danger of dying. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief and relaxed into his seat.
I'm glad.
Me too, Sir said with feeling. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. I never thought that Sir Nighteye would be good with children, but it just works. This chapter was so wholesome to read and I hope you enjoyed it. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah.